Good morning, boys and girls. Have you guys noticed how hot it's been this past week? Just wondering. What is one of the things we like to do when it's hot outside? What do we need to get into? Get wet. That's right. Get into water, right? And you know, water is a big, important part of the Bible. You guys know about this? There's a lot of stories that involve water in the Bible. Anybody know a story about water in the Bible? Anybody other than Archer and my daughter? Anybody else? Anybody else? Aoife, give us a water story. Jesus walking on water, very good. Where were the disciples when Jesus was walking on water? They were in a boat. That's exactly right. Archer, what do you got for me? Yeah, that's right. Water, when he parted the Red Sea, right? The Israelites walked through it. This is kind of what we're leading up to in the story we got this morning. You know what one of my favorite water stories is, and I know you guys remember this. What's the story in the Bible about a big boat and lots of animals getting on board? Emma? Noah's Ark, right? That's what you were going to say. Noah's Ark, that's exactly right. Noah's Ark's an important story, and in all these stories, not so much in the Israelites crossing the Red Sea, but in a lot of these stories, there's boats. Anybody know the Jonah story? Jonah's out on a boat, and he gets thrown in. What happens to Jonah? He gets swallowed by a big fish or a whale, right? And all of this involves a boat. And Jesus also comes walking across the water, or Jesus is asleep and he calms things down. Boats are a symbol of something important because you know what? People didn't swim as much back there because they were afraid of the water. Because water's kind of creepy if you get into deep water, right? When you're in a pool, it's okay, but when you're in deep water, it can be a little scary, especially if you don't know how to swim, right? And boats are important. And so the ark is the boat to help people with the water, and the apostles are on the boat, and Jesus comes and calms the sea, right? And all of those things are a very important part of being a boat. So we have a boat in this morning's story. I don't know if you heard that story from Exodus. But Moses has an important boat story because Moses is in a lot of trouble. There's this guy named Pharaoh, and he is a bad dude. You guys know any bad dudes? Some bad dudes out there. Pharaoh is a bad dude, right? And so Moses is in trouble, and he gets put out on the Nile. But his mom builds a little boat because boats are a symbol of how God can save us. And did you guys know that every time you come into church, there's a symbol of a boat here? It kind of matches with Moses, matches with Noah's Ark, matches with the apostles. Can you all figure out where the boat is in the church right now? Anybody other than Archer or my daughter? Anybody else know where the boat is? Archer, I'm going with you first. Where is it? The cushions? Well, there might be some pictures of boats on cushions. Aoife, what do you think? The stained glass? No, the stained glass isn't really a symbol of a boat. I want all of you guys here to look straight up. Look at the ceiling. Look all the way back through there. Now, it's a little upside down, but do you see the symbol of the inside of the boat? This is an important piece of our story as Christians because even though we're out on the hard seas of life, you see all these people out here? They have hard seas of life they have to deal with. You will have a hard sea and a storm you have to go through. And you know what? God is always a symbol of a boat that comes to save us. And every time we come into the church, we have a symbol of the boat above us. And it's like all of us are rowing. You ever been on a rowboat before? Takes a little bit of work. Takes a little bit of work to row your way to shore. You know, what's that song? Michael, row the boat ashore, hallelujah, right? So Archer knows it already. That's the symbol of that one. That wasn't really the boat. But that's a good one too. But that's the symbol of the boat because somebody loves us and is always willing to help us when we're struggling. So can you guys help all these people here who it is? And let's stick with the name of the big guy, right? Jesus, okay? On the count of three. See all those people in the back? See Mr. Richard standing back there? He needs to hear you way back there. On the count of three, who is it that loves us? 1, 2, 3. Good job, guys. Good job. Row your boat right on out that way.
I would say the big guy's God. I couldn't wait for Archer.
It's the boat rowing right on out to the Children's Chapel. Well, good morning. It was a conversation I have had many, many times before. The woman who was sitting next to me had been particularly talkative on the morning flight out of Jacksonville, Florida, to JFK Airport in New York City, and she had just asked me what I did for a living. So I took a deep breath and I had to tell her, I am an Episcopal priest. And right then and there, in the middle of what had been a very normal conversation up to that point, where we were talking about where we were from and where we were going, everything changed instantly. It was as if all the religious baggage that so many of us can carry with us from past experiences in our lives suddenly came pouring out from this woman sitting next to me. Now, in the South, we clergy get accustomed to that kind of baggage nearly every time the title of pastor, preacher, priest, or minister is mentioned around us. Down here, it tends to immediately cause people to feel compelled to apologize for the use of inappropriate curse words that have come out during conversation they've had with you. But up in the Northeast, where I lived for 3 years in seminary and where my new friend had happened to be returning home to after a visit to the Sunshine State, religious titles and identities can bring about different kinds of responses. There's a much better chance in that part of the country that the people you meet will have little or no experience whatsoever with church or with its clergy, in which case they could just as easily see a Christian minister through the messy lens of our current news and social media posts. In cases like that, people either stop talking altogether, or they change the subject, or if they feel comfortable enough with you, they might just let you know why church and religion is not for them. In the situation I'm remembering this morning, it was the latter. And it began with that one phrase that can and should, I think, annoy any seasoned pastor, priest, or preacher. The nice woman looked at me with a big smile and said, "Oh, well, I'm actually a very spiritual person as well. I'm just not at all religious." And with that, she launched into telling me all about her interest in all world religions and spiritual paths. She told me she'd read about the Buddha and about Hinduism, that she had good friends who were Jewish in the city, and how she'd even once been interested in modern paganism and Scientology. She then made a point of telling me that she certainly thought Jesus was great too, that she found Jesus to be a phenomenal moral teacher and someone she certainly thought was on the same level as the Prophet Muhammad, Martin Luther King Jr., and Mahatma Gandhi. In the end, she said it was just that whole Son of God thing that she couldn't wrap her mind around. She saw God much more in sunsets and in the ocean and out in nature, and all that made her feel that she didn't really need a church or a religion to tell her what to believe or how to connect with God. No offense to me, of course, she added with a wink and a smile. Well, with that, I just smiled back and nodded my head politely, as my mama taught me to do. And then I told her honestly that I did understand where she was coming from, and no offense was taken. I even threw in what was and still is the absolute truth, that I also find a lot of wisdom in other world religions and in the visions of God many of these different spiritual paths hold for us. I told her that I work very hard to treat all religious peoples with respect. And in a world sinking into utter materialism, I tend to count every world religion and spiritual path as at least being in some way on the same general team in the struggle with our technologically advanced culture today. Maybe not so much Scientology, but all the rest of it. And I guess that surprised her, because after I said that, I remember her pausing suddenly for just a bit. Maybe she'd been expecting me to launch into some kind of hellfire and brimstone sermon or something, to which, if that were the case, she definitely didn't know anything about us wild and woolly Episcopalians, did she? Anyway, when she had a few seconds to think it all over, she turned to me and she said, "Well, how is it then that you ended up becoming a priest in a Christian church?" To which I quickly and without hesitation said, "Jesus." Yes, I certainly enjoy understanding other religions and knowing what they believe. But for me, I am and have always been a disciple of Jesus Christ, and I really do believe that Jesus is the Son of God. And as if on cue, the pilot suddenly came over the speaker and announced that we were beginning our descent into the JFK airport. And with that, we wrapped up our conversation with very sincere and appreciative farewells. We bid each other safe travels. And I wasn't exaggerating with my new friend. I really do understand where it is she's coming from. As much as the spiritual but not religious statement drives me absolutely crazy, I get it today. There are many, many people who absolutely like and even long for this idea of spirituality in their lives, but the idea is as far as they can go with it. Some even like and appreciate what they know and understand about Christianity, especially what it truly has to say about loving our neighbors as ourselves and doing good. They love the Sermon on the Mount, and they're ready to accept Jesus as a really good, honorable, and inspirational person. But in the end, it is Jesus as God incarnate. That's what for so many spiritual but not religious people is going just a bit too far. And in our world today, it's no wonder that's the line that many people feel no one really needs to cross anymore anyway. There are many books that have come out in the last century and a half that have worked really hard to give humanity a more rational and historical view of Jesus. There are books today on Jesus, the peasant revolutionary, Jesus, the mystical wisdom teacher, and Jesus, the Jewish rabbi. There's books on Jesus, the dangerous religious zealot, and books on Jesus as nothing more than a charlatan and a skilled magician. And if that weren't enough, if you want to, you can even find books that will help you know Jesus as a socialist, Jesus as a Democrat, or Jesus as a Republican. And if you need economic and business advice, there's a Jesus for that as well. Yet for all these ideas and images that we modern-day humans try to posit upon Jesus, for us as Christians, the chief question remains the same as it has always been. If someone cannot step over the line of historical, cultural, and sociological conjecture into the realm of faith and action, then Christianity really has little to nothing to offer in the world today, not even for those who strive for an idea of being spiritual. If we cannot wrap our hearts and minds around the core of the Christian proclamation, that God revealed God's self to creation most perfectly in the person of Jesus of Nazareth, who was God with us, born of the Virgin Mary, fully divine and fully human, who physically died on a cross and 3 days later physically walked out of that grave alive, then there is certainly no need for a church, and there's no need for a Christian religion. In today's gospel, it's the disciples who are receiving this very question for the first time from none other than Jesus himself while they are resting in Caesarea Philippi. This morning in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus asks them outright, "Who do the people say that the Son of Man is?" Now, this first version of the question is a safe one for disciples because it really requires no personal commitment or proclamation from the party being questioned. Jesus is simply asking, what are other people out there in the towns and villages we have visited saying about who I am? And so the disciples answer honestly. Many of the people, they tell Jesus, were willing to put him in league with the greatest of the Jewish prophets as the long-awaited Elijah or maybe even Jeremiah. And there are others who had been to the Jordan to see and experience John the Baptist, and they were quite convinced that Jesus was John's successor. Jesus, for all of these people, just like a lot of people in the world today, was a great spiritual teacher and a great prophet in line with the ancient prophets of the Hebrew tradition. But Jesus doesn't stop there. He then turns the question on the disciples themselves. If the people think he is like one of these great prophets of God, then who do you, my disciples and followers, say that I am? Now, I'm pretty sure there must have been a moment of silence after that, as the disciples looked around at each other to see who was going to step in and answer this question first. But then, as we have seen over and over again over these past several weeks, it is the brave apostle Simon Peter who decides to take it on at the start. He says outright, "Lord, the people say you are a prophet, but I say you are more. I believe you to be the chosen one we have been waiting for, and the anointed Son of the living God, come to save us all." To this, the gospel tells us that Jesus blesses Simon Peter for his proclamation of faith, declaring, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell and death will not prevail against it." And with that blessing, Jesus does something that also reveals his divinity, because it's something only God has ever done in the past. Just as God renamed Abram as Abraham and Sarai as Sarah to indicate that by faith, Abraham and Sarah would be the parents of God's chosen people, so Jesus here renames the apostle Peter from the Greek Petros, meaning strong rock or boulder. Jesus says that on that rock of solid faith that Peter has just convinced, above all else, he will establish a new family and a new community. Jesus' ecclesia, his body and his church. That faith of Jesus as the Son of the living God, the cornerstone of the church, will be so strong, Jesus says that not even the gates of hell and death will be able to overcome it. And Jesus isn't simply talking politics here. Jesus is talking about the power of death, which all of us face, which will be overturned, foreshadowing in his words what will be further revealed on that Easter morning, when the tomb that seemed to have swallowed Jesus up will be empty. St. Peter's confession then is not just the beginning of a new spiritual idea to enlighten humanity. St. Peter's confession of faith is the beginning of a new religion, a new action and commitment that has the power to transform all who are caught up in it and to change and restore God's creation and God's world. In his letter to the Romans this morning, St. Paul writes, "I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect." I tell you, I've met many a spiritual person in my life to which this appeal of St. Paul would be going way too far. Presenting our personal bodies as living sacrifices, a God who asks for devotion and worship, a religion that directs us not to conform with what's going on in the world, but to be transformed by discerning the will of God above everything else. This requires more of us than just a good idea we feel when we look out and see the beauty of nature. Thinking occasionally in the best times about God and spirituality is certainly, I'd say, an option that puts the agnostic above the atheist and the materialist. But the problem is it requires so little. It doesn't really ask of us anything, and therefore it leaves little chance for real transformation. When I run into spiritual people who aren't religious, who want to know why, with all the great spiritual guides of this world, with all the amazing ways God has been experienced and understood, I would ever want to put all my eggs in just one basket, or who ask why I would want to give it all to one church community and to one faith, when that comes up, I simply tell them exactly what I told that woman on the plane. It's because I believe Jesus Christ is the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And because I believe, I have to sing about it. I have to put belief into it. I have to put action behind it. Because it is with community and action and worship that Jesus continues to change and transform and reshape my life. And believe me, brothers and sisters, if you believe, if you let Jesus into your heart and not just into your brain, if you can put your faith in Jesus and get downright religious about it, then your life will be changed, transformed, and reshaped as well. Faith requires our hearts to be lit on fire for God. Our spirituality requires something that makes a commitment to what we do. Our worship requires nothing short of giving our very life over to God first. But when we give our life to Jesus, Jesus, brothers and sisters, gives us nothing less than himself, which is all around us in this church right now and all around us in this world, and will be everything to us, no matter what storm the world throws at us. Amen.